The 5-point plan. For Americans today, the chief lesson of the last 300 years is easy to state as a principle, but much more difficult to put into practice. Here is the lesson. The plan works. Stick to the plan. The protocols of the elders Greenwich are still the best guide to grand strategy. For almost 400 years, taking the Dutch experience into account, the countries that have been willing and able to follow this strategy consistently have prospered and even triumphed. Such a heritage should not be lightly cast aside. Spain, France, Germany, Japan, the Soviet Union, all these great powers once fought great wars against the maritime order. Once each of these powers seemed to warp in the air of power and triumph. Their armies bristled with advanced weapons. Their military leaderships included men of great courage and wisdom. Their brilliant diplomats dominated world politics, and they assembled great and intimidating alliances. Often, the world-leading intellectuals saying hosannas to the glory and the wonder of the philosophy or religion whose name they march. More than once, the maritime powers they have foolishly and divided. At times they have been late to recognize danger and slow to act. At other times they have rashly embarked on campaigns that have increased the danger they face and strengthened the coalitions they fought. Greed, cowardice, arrogance, complacency, sloth, and self-righteousness. Every vice known to history has flourished in the politics and policy of the maritime states. They have committed almost every possible folly and crime. They have neglected the rise of great and dangerous rivals. They antagonize the vast swaths of the world population through cruelty and injustice. They have suffered staggering defeats. They periodically lost their grip on stubborn realities of international life and squandered great opportunities to make the world better in an ill-advised rush to make it perfect. And yet, despite these failings and more, 3 centuries has seen the walrus and the carpenter advance towards a more democratic, more affluent, and more open societies at home, while defending and developing the maritime system abroad. If history teaches anything at all, it should teach Americans that this grand strategy works. That will remain what Admiral Mead would call a sea power in the fullest sense of the term, and that the United States of the 21st century. Thomas Pilon's comments about the British policy in the 18th century still holds true. Minister in this country, where every part of the world affects us, in some way or another, should consider the whole globe. The greatest disaster that came upon the United States, and indeed the whole world, in the last 100 years did not come from any American blunders carrying out a sea power program. The intervention in Vietnam, the rash invasion of Saddam Hussein Iraq, these were disasters that brought untold grief and pain to innocent victims, that sacrificed the lives of honorable and patriotic soldiers, that squandered American treasure and damaged America's standing. That these disasters pale before the horrors brought on by isolation, extension, and the foolish neglect of our responsibilities abroad. George Kennan, the scholar and diplomat credited with the development of the containment strategy that guided American foreign policy during the Cold War, was a bitter critic of both Vietnam and the Iraq wars. Yet Kennan's history of American foreign policy from 1900 through 1950 make harsher judgments about America's failure to engage comprehensively and globally and at times to use force. Kennan argues that America's neglect of the deteriorating European balance of power before World War I encouraged Germany on the road to war, and that America's vacillation and delay before entering the conflict made the war longer and uglier than it had to be. This is almost certainly true. Had America recognized Britain's increasingly need for assistance in managing the maritime order, and responded to it earlier, that the war and its tenets horrors might as well have been avoided. Nazism and communism might have never come to power. Hundreds of millions of lives could have been saved. America compounded its failures and the folly after the war. Wilson tragically fraud peace proposals. The American withdrawal not only from the League of Nations but also from the European security system after the failure of the Treaty of Versailles. The willful American blindness to the danger posed by the rise of Nazi and Stalinist power. These helped make World War II inevitable in Europe and contributed to some of the darkest hours and the darkest deed the world has ever known. American folly and complacency were equally disastrous for Asia. Kennan notes where American diplomacy feebly opposed Japanese aggression with pious sentiments. American passivity and blindness helped bring on the agonies of war in the Pacific and its terrible aftermath in China. No blunder, no folly, no crime, no sin commissioned by American foreign policy since has been devastating and costly as the silent sins of the omission that so mark and marred the first half of the 20th century. This too is a lesson of history. Americans need to be conscious and prudent, but above all they must be globally engaged, and the business of which they must engage is the old business of the old firm. The creation and development of the world system based on the 5-point program that the Dutch dimly envisioned. The protocols of the elder Greenwich are not only the most effective grand strategy that the United States can pursue in the international arena, they're also the best guide to a genuinely moral and progressive stance in the world. They integrate our security needs, our economic interests, our ideals for a more fully than any alternative we have, the maintenance of the global geopolitical stability, the growth of global commerce, and rising prosperity of the poor, the spread of liberal and democratic institutions, and the practices around the world. American grand strategy always concerned itself with these goals.